sit in the corner of a diner. Both of them look quite a bit like Carl Reiner.
Welcome everybody. We're just gonna wait for everybody to get let in the room before we start. A little music to get us going.
The waitress says to stop. He says sorry, but I've got to.
It helps me with all the energy of like being in a room with someone. If people use their video, turn on their video.
They talk about real estate, prostates, Costco.
It really is.
And when they finish up, they leave a 20 on the table. The waitress picks it up with the half-eaten bagels. When her shift is over, she goes back to Mediola. Sits on the couch, opens up her
We have another Erika joining us. Hi Erika.
I'm so sick of this place. I'm so ready for a change of pace. I'm just looking for a new routine. So she spins her
Hey, Zach.
globe, and the next thing you know,
Hi, Erika.
she's living
Hey,
in
Francis.
Liechtenstein. She doesn't speak German, only
I don't hear the music anymore. I stopped the music.
Okay,
So
you were
we
still
could get
dancing, so I wasn't sure.
I stopped the music so we could get going. Eventually the music has to stop or otherwise you will not be able to hear me at all.
Your hair looks fab. Looks new since I've seen you years ago.
Thank you. My hair is always changing every day.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lauren Worth. I work for a company called Clean Out Your House. And today we are sponsoring Living Harmony and Erika Salu's session this afternoon. So thank you all for joining us. When Leslie Gatos of New England Cable News saw some of Erika Salu's work, she exclaimed, "You work wonders." And one of Erika's clients once said, "Major miracles are coming when you work with Erika." Erika is a certified professional organizer and founder of Living Harmony LLC located in Cambridge. And since 2003, she has been getting people organized for success. Employing her holistic approach to organizing, Erika conducts transformative events. Erika is an active member of the National Association of Productivity and Organizing Professionals and Holistic Organizers, which is a group of international organizers who integrate spiritual and holistic principles and practices into their work and advocate for a compassionate, heart-centered approach to organizing. Erika regularly contributes to Boston area and national media outlets, and I am excited to hear what she has to present to you all this afternoon. So with that, I'll turn it over to Erika.
Thanks, Lauren. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Clean Out Your House rocks. Everyone look in your chat. There's some links and there's some instructions. And since I like to see people, I know what they're thinking. It's really good to turn on your camera and you can even unmute if you don't have noise. I don't mind that at all. If you have noise, then mute yourself. But definitely look in the chat because there'll be things in there that you'll want to know about. Okay, so put your questions as I go in the chat. We're not going to address them because we only have such a short period of time and I have no control about going over because they're going to like cut us off right at 10 of. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with them later on. It's going to be a little bit of a surprise and a little bit of a bonus. So as you think of things, as we're going, if you have any questions, put them in there. Regina, my awesome executive producer, is going to capture them all and I'll tell you what I'm going to do with them later. So let's start off with like a little poll and I'm going to have you guys put in the chat to share what is your biggest flow disruptor, like your biggest challenge from working from home, if you're working from home, or if you're not working from home, what interrupts your flow of the day when you're wanting to get stuff done? I think we all know what flow is. Like if you think of a surfer surfing along, when we're, in that zone, athletes say that they're in the zone. The other day, Tsitsipas, a tennis player at the Australian Open. He beat the number 2 player in the world. And he said, I don't know what I did. It was kind of like nirvana, you know? So we're in the zone. We feel like we're in nirvana. He said he couldn't explain what happened. He didn't know what he wasn't in his head. He actually said, I wasn't in my head. So if you can put down right in the chat, and Regina will yell them out to me, like what people are putting in the chat about what's your biggest disruptor or challenge working from home. It could be people interrupting you in the middle of the day. It could be you interrupting yourself by looking at things that are going on somewhere else that isn't what you really want to be doing. Anything like that. It could be just noise in your home. Some people like get easily distracted by noise and they're challenged by that, whatever that is. And Regina, if you can tell me what people put in the chat, that'd be great.
I know notifications coming in on my phone are disruptors. We have noise and people.
Yeah, so other people in the area or in your home, yep. Okay. Anything else?
Not being able to set boundaries when the day ends and continuing to be quote unquote on for work.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I see that a lot with my clients. That's just like continuing to work. Yep. Anything else in there?
Other people's requests for help.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. And a lot of times we think things are emergencies that aren't emergencies because other people come to us and make them sound like they're emergencies, or they're their emergencies and we let them become our emergencies. Yes, that's a common one, definitely. And that has to do with boundaries too. Yeah. Great. Okay. Anything else?
Media, the news.
The news. Yes, one of my recent clients said that to me, the news. Yep. Okay, so this is really good to hear because these are ones I've heard before, and it's really good to know what you guys are, you know, what we're being challenged with. So what I'm going to tell you before we even start is I'm not asking you to believe me at all. I am asking you to take a little leap. Like the song I was playing was about that because it's about like a change, new things, like new habits, things we want new in our life. But I'm not saying like, listen to me. I'm saying just think about listening to these strategies and then saying maybe you'll take one, even if it's just one small one, and implement it and see what happens. Because these strategies I'm going to share with you today and the ideas and the research are things that have helped my clients. Because even before the pandemic, I work with entrepreneurs and people who work for other people, their employees. And these tips, you can take them and use them just like my clients have and see what happens. That's all I'm asking. Just do it and see what happens. You'll see that there's a few points I'm going to repeat even though it's a short time that we have together, because they're like the super important points. So you might see a little bit of repetition, and that is the reason. So I'm going to first start off with the crippling mistakes that I see that people make when they're working from home. And like I said, I work with entrepreneurs even before this pandemic who worked from home because they had a home office, just like I have a home office. Number one is not creating or holding any time boundaries at all. This is a workshop about boundaries, so of course I'm going to talk a lot about that. So you wouldn't do this, would you? I mean, some people do this, and that's why they hire me. You've got magazines, you've got CDs together, you've got a newspaper, it's all together, right? You wouldn't do that. That's not considered good organization, right? You wouldn't do this either. Like you wouldn't put socks with your earrings. That doesn't make sense. That's not like things together, like we learned on Sesame Street. And you wouldn't do this either, right? Once again, sometimes people do that, and that's why they call me, because they got a junk drawer with all this stuff in it. Yet, even though we look at this and we say, yeah, I wouldn't do that, we do this. Now, we all know that that is an ad for Slack. If you hadn't seen it before, then now you know. They show this ad saying like, this is awesome, right? You can like mix up your personal life. You can like be brushing your teeth and sending someone an email. Like this is what they're saying is an awesome thing to do. So I'm going to say the opposite of this. I'm going to say this is the worst thing that you can do. I'm not saying it's not good to have an office in your pool. If that is your office and you can be in the pool, that's great. I've shot videos in a pool in Mexico before for my business, and that's fun. But if you're mixing and there's no boundaries at all between your work and your personal life, like someone put in the chat that Regina said to me, is that it's when do we stop, right? When's that? It's hard to make that stop because you're at home. So we used to have these like cues, like buses, coworkers going for lunch, getting on the public transport, our boss leaving the office, even if it was late. So what I'm going to suggest is that how do we replace those cues that we don't have now that we're working from home? So planning like virtual and live meals with other people, for instance. One of my recent clients, he was complaining that his wife, for instance, he'd go in the kitchen while he was working just to grab something, and she would want to start this big personal discussion about something, and he didn't want to. And I said, what about if you had lunch with her? And that would be a time. It's good to take a break. And I'm going to get to that more about the science behind breaks. It's good to take a break. So why not just have lunch and then tell her that time's devoted to us to chat to each other and just relax? It's going to help you. It's going to help her have some time with you during the day that she obviously is craving. So I'm going to talk about distinct work and personal time. Also, like set up virtual exercise time with people or live exercise. There's these people down the street from me, and they, even in the freezing cold, have been exercising outside with these bands. Like they must be a bubble, and they're out there with stretch bands and like doing stuff in the freezing cold. I don't know how they do it but I have been going to exercise classes that are virtual because they help me connect with other people. Some people in this group know about those classes and have been there. And I love that because it makes me have this time that I know is going to be there and I can plan ahead of time. So I'm going to talk about thinking about this time, how we can prioritize our time and make it important that we to make those two distinctions. Creating blocks of time, even within your work for certain types of work, also helps. So to do like tasks together makes it way more productive. We're more productive when we group like tasks together. I just gave a presentation for the National Speakers Association. It was just on that one subject about tying your tasks together, because that is really, really an amazing thing to do. And it helps us be more productive. And set yourself up by being proactive about what the obstacles are going to be. When I work with my clients, I always work with them about what are the obstacles going to be before we even start the organizing project, no matter what the project is. So if you know, for instance, that you have kids that are going to interrupt you, or your spouse is working from home and he's going to make noise when you're on a call, think about how you can be proactive about that. Think about, can I wear headphones? Can I set my kids up with activities or a sitter, or what can I do so that they're occupied and I set those boundaries? And I'm going to get more into how we set those and make them better. So the other thing I see, that number 2 mistake I see people make, is they don't have any space boundaries. So there's time boundaries and then there's space boundaries. If you think about this and look at this picture, you can see, is this an office? Is this a living room? Is this a kitchen? You see everything from like food to computer to a printer to a TV. So yes, it's disorganized, but I've also seen more organized spaces that are like that. There's no delineation of space. So what I tell people is to create delineated and distinct places, even if it's small, even if you live in a really small space. So even when I'm working in spaces that are open spaces in the city, for instance, where there's, big open space and it has to be a kitchen, a dining room, a living room, a workspace, you can still delineate the space, because all our space holds energy. And our body remembers that. It remembers the energy of that space. So if you can create distinct places where you have leisure and you're not ever working there, it's going to help you relax and wind down at the end of the day. So just like we talked about when someone said it's harder to wind down, that'll help you if you have distinct workspaces. So during the pandemic, I read Charlie Warzel. He's a New York Times writer, and this is what he said in an article he wrote, and I thought this completely describes what I'm saying. Indeed, those boundaries collapsed for me when I made the transition 3 years ago from commuting into a Manhattan office to working from home in Montana. My first month in, I spent so much time working from my couch that when I'd sit back down on it at night to unwind, I'd break into a cold sweat. My mind and body unable to understand why I was in my office mainlining Netflix. And this is before the pandemic. So this is what happened to a lot of people during the pandemic, is they just started to feel like there was no boundary between their work and their personal life at all. So what I suggest is harder for us to do for most of us where we're in a cold environment now, but you could actually even go outside and work. So when it was warm, that's what I was doing. And I recommend taking off your shoes and putting your feet on the bare earth. It's going to help you sleep more at night because you're way more grounded, and just getting all that fresh air and the sun. And even if it's not sunny, like even putting on a sweater when it's a little more chilly is so helpful. So we can do that later when it gets warm for those of us who are in the snow right now. And I'm just going to say that if you, once again, if you just do this and see what happens, you're going to see amazing results. The other thing is, once you create those spaces, the boundary space, to not let other people in during the time when you're working. And that's, we're going to get to how do you do that? Because a lot of my clients will say, that's really hard. People break my boundaries all the time. I set them, but they break them. Number 3 mistake that I see is that people don't clear out the unneeded stuff from the space first before they start to think about creating a work environment that's going to work in their home. If they didn't have one already. So this is a photo. If you looked at it, you could see beforehand, they had a lot of old computers, legacy, what one of my clients calls legacy cords, outdated manuals, like all chucked in there. If we didn't get rid of those first, we couldn't have made room for those office supplies that they really needed in there, and the one computer that they needed to like monitor or something in their office, which I forget what that was. But I tell people to think about that. If we ate and ate and ate and we never had anything come out of our body, we'd be in big trouble, wouldn't we? So I really want people to think about what can they let go of or move to another space if they're going to set up an office or make a space that's going to work for them. Now, Clean Out Your House, my sponsor, is amazing. They have helped so many of my clients. And the good thing about them is, I'm going to tell you how they're different from other junk removal places. They don't just take your junk away. They take everything. They don't just take trash. They take everything. And they don't just trash the stuff. They recycle and sell what they can. So in other words, you get a part of, if they sell something, like they could take a table and they could also take paint that you want to just throw away that has to be, gone through and dried out and stuff. And then you get part of what if they sell stuff in the consign, they have 2 stores and they sell it, then you get part of it. So a lot of my clients are really reluctant to let go of stuff because they think, oh my gosh, like I paid a lot for that, or I could use it later, when it's really not useful to them and they need something different in that space. So this is a really good way to let go of stuff. And also they have a store in Waltham and in Pembroke. And not only that, but they also give a percentage to local charities. So you're helping actually the community and charities and people that have less when you're doing that, when you're letting go of your stuff. And also it's in one fell swoop. It's just so easy to do. So now I'm going to get to the boundaries and the misconceptions about boundaries, and then get to the truths about boundaries, and then how do we actually set them up, my steps for setting them up to work for you when you're working from home. A lot of this stuff about boundaries you can use, and not about working from home either. You can use them in all sorts of areas of your life. So one misconception about boundaries that I see from people is they think boundaries take away their freedom. And number 2 thing I see is that they say that boundaries are really rigid. They create walls in our life. That boundaries, what do you think this one signifies? Anybody? What?
Stop the progress of.
Yeah, you're really close. Like it creates rigidness, So like you see how there's a flow going there, but then that boundaries create rigidness in our life. Yes, Nicholas, that's a really good guess. The next thing I see is that people think boundaries make us weak. That's a really big one, that boundaries make us weak. And we're going to talk about that. Also, that boundaries are bad for our relationships. I hear from so many people like, yeah, if I set that boundary, it's going to ruin my relationships. Also, that boundaries are bad for our health, and that boundaries are really difficult to set. They're difficult to set and difficult to maintain. Those are like the top myths about boundaries that I hear from people all the time when I'm working with them and we're working on getting organized. So now I'm going to tell you what the truth is about them. Actually, boundaries supply us with freedom. There's an old monastic saying that says freedom is found in the context of limitations. Actually, limitations are liberating. That sounds really odd, but it's so true. Deborah Lipsitz, a PhD psychotherapist in Philadelphia, is the author of this book called Schopenhauer's Porcupines. And in her book, and follows up on this research that she's done, she says that in midlife, what I see in my Gen X patients is total exhaustion. That's what brings them to treatment. They feel guilty for complaining because it's wonderful to have had choices that their mothers didn't have, but choices don't make life easier. Possibilities create pressure. And I see that so often when I'm working with my clients. The more possibilities that they have, and we have so many now than we used to, the more stressful that they are. It's harder to narrow down and make those choices. So something to think about. In reality, boundaries open up to the best possibilities. Boundaries are all about getting clear on what's good for you and what you want and what you need, and then acting upon them. And then it gives you the right possibilities. They're just like a really simple expression to like how you want to be treated. And if you think of them like that, then you'll realize how helpful they are. And I connect this a lot with self-love through self-care, and boundaries are self-care. And I've really learned that when we let go of the expectation that we have to please everybody, and we can practice that, then in reality, we're attracting the energy and the people that are going to be best for us when we have those clear boundaries. So one little exercise that I do and that I recommend that for people is this question that when you get out of bed in the morning, to ask yourself, what one thing could I do today to love myself more? And believe it or not, if you can answer that and then act on it, it's actually going to help you with your boundaries. Because really, it's about getting what we want. It's like we want more grace, guidance, love, like truer and intimate relationships in our life, and more flow, like we talked about. And that's really what boundaries give us. So actually, in reality, boundaries create more flow in our lives. If we don't set healthy boundaries, we wouldn't have like the work life that we want, the business, if you run your own business that we have, we wouldn't have the life we desire at all. If we want to attract what serves us, then boundaries are a definite way to help us with that. So for instance, a lot of times if I work with entrepreneurs or people who are working even for somebody else and they only have like one phone line, or they have their work line on all the time, it's kind of like taking that home with you. Now that people are working from home, they won't have time to be with their spouses or be with their kids or be with their friends at the end of the day, because they're always like have that availability to be at work. Sonia Choquette says that boundaries, she's this really amazing intuitive. She's a world famous intuitive. She says that boundaries, when we have really good boundaries, they increase our intuition. So that's related to flow, in my opinion. She explains that boundaries that honor how we feel means that we have more clarity in our life, and we have more clarity, our intuition gets stronger. And so it creates more harmony and peace in our lives. It also scares off negative surprises. We have less of those surprises that are stressful and negative. And actually, in reality, boundaries give us more power. When we're being intentional instead of just reacting, we are being proactive instead of reactive. This is a really big key that we want to use in anything in our lives, but especially with our boundaries. Some of you might know Dan Millman's book. It's a really famous book, The Way of the Peaceful Warrior. And in this book, he says, a warrior acts and the fool only reacts. And this is where boundaries come in, because boundaries are helping us be reactive, not reactive, but proactive. Boundaries in reality actually don't ruin our relationships. They increase our intimacies with others and ourselves. When we have boundary issues, we have intimacy issues. And what is intimacy? It's like saying, I see you and you see me. Not saying that, but actually that's the reality. I get you, I see you. And we can only really be loved for who we are if we really reveal who we are. And so that means getting vulnerable. And boundaries actually create better relationships when we are more vulnerable. And as we all know, a lot of us know, not all of us, but a lot of us probably know about Brene Brown's work about vulnerability. the world-renowned researcher for her work on that. She lists boundaries as the first of 7 elements of trust that are needed for a healthy relationship. So she lists like, this is what is needed for a healthy relationship: trust, and boundaries build trust. And that's her number one thing, is boundaries. And this is how she talks about boundaries. She says, I trust you if you are clear about your boundaries and hold them, and if you respect my boundaries. So think about that. Think about any relationship, especially in our work environments and with our families, that the more someone trusts us, the better the relationship is, right? So in reality, it creates stronger relationships, not weakens them. Also, boundaries increase our overall health. Dr. Mario Martinez, he's a clinical neuropsychologist and a founder of the Biocognitive Science Institute. He actually is really well known as well. He says that he has a list of like, what are the traits that centenarians have, right? He has a list, and it's called the cause of health list, right? So what do centenarians do? And one of them is boundaries. They have really great boundaries. So think about that. You live longer, you're healthier if you have better boundaries. That's kind of amazing when you think of it. And actually, boundaries create more flow in our lives. It's actually, people think they're hard to set, and that can be true if we don't know how to set them, and if we think of them as challenging. But it becomes easier and easier to set them the more we learn and we practice them, and then we get the hang of it. So I'm going to just give you my steps to actually having boundaries that work. So setting them. Some of these might seem like no-brainers, and when I give them to people, I feel as though they sound like no-brainers too. But a lot of times this is what I see that we're not doing, and sometimes even I get tripped up in them when I'm setting them myself. So these are the steps to having really, really clear and great boundaries and bold boundaries. First, we have to start off with just our fears and our feelings around boundaries in general. So we might think like, oh, if I set that boundary, she'll leave me, or that person will get angry at me. But if we name that fear out loud, if we say it out loud, like, okay, this is scaring me, then we have more control over that. And we can say, okay, let me just go forward because I know this is the right thing once we name it out loud. Number 2, think of the conversation that if you're setting a boundary that needs a conversation, so not all of them do, but if you are, think of it not as difficult, but important. Because as we know, the language we use is so important. And if we say something's going to be difficult, then it's going to be difficult. We want to say, okay, it's an important conversation, and that's my belief, but I'm going to put that energy into saying it in a loving way. So, like I just said, there's number 3 is when you set the boundary, there's some that you need to speak and some that can be totally silent just by your actions, like you set a boundary. And the trick is to express it. If you're going to express it, if it's a spoken one, to say it gracefully, gently, and lightly. So really a good thing to do is to say, I feel this, instead of pointing the finger at the other person and saying you. So you can also use the we. So Richard Branson always says that his success is about we. That's what he says, because I use he says it's we. That's when people ask him in interviews. So it's about, this is how I'm feeling, and then this would be good for us and we. That really helps people understand that it's really not just about you. Starting with the positive really helps in terms of being graceful and light about it, because I want this for us, like I just said. And also knowing when to set a silent boundary is knowing the difference between a spoken one and a silent one. And this is one for me that has been the biggest challenge for me, because I'm like such a speaker, as you can see. So sometimes I could set a boundary that is silent and I say something instead of not. So I really have learned a lot of myself with this. If the more we explain, the more we give like reason for people to shoot us down and, have reasons why they don't want to follow along or why they don't think it's a good idea. So number 4, being detached from the outcome. And I know this one can be really hard because we don't really have control over how people react. Of course, some people will just like whatever we do. Some people will retreat when we first set a boundary because they're used to us acting in a different way. So if we already have a pattern of dance, like if you think of life, any relationship and life as a dance, if you change your moves, the other person can either like say no and then walk away, or they can change their moves. And sometimes people need some time to adjust. So if you've been in a relationship for a while and been this way, they might need some time for you to be different, and they might overreact in the beginning. Give them some time and some space. So number 5 is definitely the one that I see as the biggest no-brainer, is stick to your boundary. Be consistent as much as you can. I know that challenges can come up, but as much as you can, being consistent helps people to trust you and know that you are authentic. A lot of times people think they've lost the power in the boundary when they set it, but usually it's that we're letting that person break the boundary. It's not that they have that ability to disrespect it. We're letting them disrespect it. So just think about when kids are little, how there has to be a consequence. So if you say, okay, we're not going to go out to the park until everyone has cleaned their room, and they don't, and you still take them to the park, they know that there's no consequence. And so they just are going to do whatever and walk all over you. So think of any relationship as like that. You need to have some sort of consequence if they have the ability to break it. So let's say, I had a client that yelled at me. So I said to him, if you yell at me, I'm going to walk away. So that was the consequence. I'm going to walk away, and that's it. We're done. And next time he yelled at me because he forgot, that's what I did. So you have to have there be a consequence. So those are my simple steps. I just want to give you guys a few scripts. I have handouts that I give to people when I'm working with them, and they write their own scripts, and I also give them some just to start them off. And these are a few when I think about working from home that have worked for my clients. So you're asked to set a meeting at a time that's not in your work hours, that you have not agreed to working if you're working for someone else, or if you're working for yourself, the hours you made up for yourself. And these are some things that you can say. That time doesn't work for me. And here are some that do. They don't have to know why. You could just not be in the mood. You don't have to lie. Like, I'm not into lying. So that's why I say that. Just say that, that doesn't work for me. They don't have to know why. The second one is your spouse comes into your office, like people said, people interrupting you while you're working, and they want to talk about some personal stuff. Now, this is also where you can make it also about them and being positive for them. It's a win-win. You want to make it win-win. So this sounds like it's really important to you, and I want to be really fully present, and I can't do that right now because I'm working. So later we can talk about it. Once again, you can put these into your own words. You can make it a little bit how you would say it, but that's the gist of it. And this really works because they feel really heard. Oh, this is important. She realizes it's important, and I'm going to get better attention later if I wait till later. You want to say no to any type of request. This is like a blanket one that you can use in so many different ways. Once again, this sounds important to you, so let me reflect on it and get back to you, and I'll answer you by this date. This is really, really awesome to do for anything. I actually even do it even if I want to say yes to something, because it gives me time to sleep on it, like they say, because when we sleep, we get ideas, our brain goes to rest, and our intuition comes into gear, and we will think about things that wouldn't have come to us. And maybe we'll think, oh, I wanted to say yes, but now I realize that's not a good idea because I had time to reflect on it. So that's something you can use a lot. Now I would just want to talk about ways that if you work for yourself, that you can really increase your income and decrease your stress from working from home. And this is where you're going to hear a little bit of this repetition of number one that I see. The first thing is creating intentional and distinct work and personal time, like I talked about earlier. This is a workspace of one of my clients, is an after photo. And what I call this is creating a power practice. So even if your work is your passion, like I said, if we're throwing ourselves in with no distinct boundaries and there's no rest, or there's not distinct times when we know we can rest, then it's really, really super stressful. And it cuts down on our creativity and our productivity, not it just being stressful. The research on creativity tells us that it is the prefrontal cortex that puts ideas together, but the prefrontal cortex can only work on one thing at a time. And when we're attempting to multitask, we're taxing that prefrontal cortex. And we'll never solve problems if our prefrontal cortex doesn't get quiet time from integrating all that information. There is a study by a really well-known research group from 2007, the Yankovich Group, a leading consumer research company. And they said that 9% of women put themselves first. The majority of women put themselves third or even further down their list of priorities. I know we're all not women on this call and on this meeting, but just think about that. Maybe that's why 81% of women consider free time the number one luxury. which is kind of shocking when you think of that. Number one, luxury. It's not stuff, it's actually time. Sherry Turkle, an MIT professor who's written a book on the threats to the conversion to the digital age, cites research that shows that mobiles have resulted in shallower communication, not deeper, as we reserve our attention for our phone, which is kind of scary. Her research shows that the presence of a tech device on a table, like even if it's there and you don't touch it, just knowing that there's a conversation that could be there, something that's drawing that attention away, actually makes it so that we're less connected to what's in front of us, the conversation that's happening right now. And so that is also really pretty shocking, all of her research. The biggest objection I hear that people say to me about this, if they work for themselves, they'll say that it's not work because I love it so much. And if they work for someone else, they'll say something like, oh, but I have to because that's what's required of me. So two things I say about that. If you work for yourself, that's a big fat illusion that your work, I love it, so it's not really work. Because like I said, if we're blending everything together, everything gets diluted. We're entering in a world without rest. And all the research goes, I could give you tons and tons of research about that, of how it makes us more stressful, how we are less productive when we're having all that blending. And then when I talk about with people that are working for someone else and there's someone else making those decisions, I'm going to get to what we can do about that. So number two is setting boundaries with phones. So if you work for yourself, that's simple. It's like getting a dual SIM card, using an app for a different phone number, and having two phones. If you're working for someone else, they're probably giving you another phone number to use. And if they're not, then asking them to do that. So if you're working from home now, or even when we go back to whatever we're going to go back to, who knows, that you're saying like, I want to make that distinctive time. Show them, you can show them the research about that. You will be more productive. There's apps, if your provider doesn't give you an app that you can use, there's stuff like phone.com, Ring Central. There's so many ways that you can have a line that you can shut off. That really helps us disconnect. Number three, you're going to see a pattern in this, what I'm talking about. Separate email addresses. If you work for yourself, have separate email addresses for work and personal. If you're working for someone else, they've given you another email address, but don't bleed into that. Don't be reading that. And I mean, I hear so many people, they're in bed and reading their work email. That's not a good idea. Once again, tons of research if we had more time that I could give you about that. And the last one is establish boundaries with your team. And this is where I say how you can negotiate. Discuss that with your team, whether it's your boss, your coworkers, your clients, what those boundaries are if they need to be spoken. So obviously you can't have a silent boundary with team members. You need to talk about that. And you can show them the research. You can, if you want any research, just email me and I'll send you some. If you don't want to research yourself, showing how when people have those distinct boundaries, they're working, they're not working, they're working, they're not working, that they're actually way more productive. I was listening to a podcast the other day that was saying how people are getting more work done. Some people are getting more work done when they're working from home than when they were in the office, which is kind of interesting. Like, what are those people doing that's different? They've obviously got the work from home thing down, and it has nothing to do with being in the office. And how is being in the office actually making them less productive? You want to think about that. So I'm going to give you two simple things that you can start immediately that help your productivity and give you more serenity and when it comes to work. So biggest objections that I hear from people is, well, I just got way too much work and it's just piling up, and they don't have enough time to get it done. It's if they're working for someone else or for themselves, either way. So I use this thing all the time in my office. I have a little pad on my desk and I write down my tasks when I start to feel overwhelmed, and I write down what's the consequence if I don't get this done today or by Friday or whatever, my amount of time is. So even on the weekend when I'm like, oh, this is all my errands. Okay, what's the consequence? So sometimes I don't even have to write that down anymore because I've gotten really good at it. But if you're starting off, this really helps. If you write the task, write the consequence, because our brain really lies to us a lot. It'll tell us all sorts of things that are not true. So then you can actually see which are the really horrible consequences, basically. And take breaks. So there's so much research that shows that take lunch, go for a walk, have a stroll, all these things actually help us be more powerful, more productive, like I just talked about. Tony Schwartz, He's one of the authors of The Power of Full Engagement. The other one is Jim Lohr. Their research shows that if people work for 2 hours, followed by 15 minutes of recovery, that's like the optimal performance. They actually get way more done during that time. Working really hard for longer than 2 hours actually leads to diminished or negative results. That's what all their research shows. Okay, so I'm gonna play a little game with you guys for $150 voucher from Clean Out Your House. So you can use it towards a clean out, or you can actually use it in one of their stores to buy a desk or buy all sort, whatever you want. They have like really great stores. So this is how this game is gonna work. Is everybody ready? Yes. Thumbs up. Regina, can you tell me if people look like they're ready? They're ready? Okay. Everybody ready? This is how this works. I'm going to give you some hints about something. And in the name of that something is something that you might have in your home. Okay. So the name, when you make the guess, is going to be inside in the item that you might have in your home. Okay. Does everyone get that?
Can you give an
Okay.
example?
Yes. So if I said if I said an African-American tennis player who's in her 20s, you would think Madison Keys and go grab your keys, because in her name has the word keys. Make sense? Thank you for asking for an example. Examples are very good. Okay. Make sense? Everyone got it? Does people look like they know that they get it? Yes. Okay. Then what you have to do is you got to go get the item and you have to put it in the chat. Regina's going to tell me who wins. Whoever can grab the item, but also have to write the word in the chat. So you have to write the word of the item that you got and the person's name or the thing, right? If it's a person or a thing. I'm not going to tell you which one. Okay, it can be a thing, it can be a person, it can be anything. It's a name, right? Okay. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is everyone ready?
I just didn't know that tennis player.
Right. Well, that's why that's my example, because most people wouldn't know that as a tennis player. Nicholas might, but that's why I gave it as an example, because the last time I did this game, I thought it was easy and it was really hard. Not that, well, that wasn't the one I used. Okay, ready? So, a comedian who was discovered by Eddie Murphy at New York's Comedy Strip and is a former cast member of Saturday Night Live. A comedian who was discovered by Eddie Murphy at New York City's Comedy Strip and is a former cast member of Saturday Night Live. Nobody knows who that is. Regina?
Not yet. Oh,
Okay. I have a backup
have
question.
Nicholas has an answer, but I don't know.
He has to have the item. You need the item, and
Item.
you need the person, and you need to put it in the chat. You need all those things. Well, Erika's getting up, so either she has an idea.
Zach's got an answer.
Idea.
You have to, so put it in the chat. Who's put it? Regina, you're gonna tell me who wins. They have to put it in the chat.
Zach, do you have the item? Zach has the item and the answer. Zach wins.
Zach wins? So what did
Yes.
he put in the chat?
Chris Rock, and he held up a rock.
Ahaha. Oh, Erika, you just got beaten out there, it looks like. Because I could see.
I only knew because he wrote Chris Rock, so I went and got a rock.
Oh! Zach, you need to get the item first, but you won anyways. Congratulations, Zach.
Zach had both.
Awesome. Zach, I know your email, so we will reach out to you and we will I will connect you with Clean Out Your House, Lauren, and we will get you your prize. Okay, so I'm impressed
he had a rock.
I know, so I didn't think everyone would have a rock in their house, but that could also be a challenge, but that was my question. Okay, so I'm just gonna take a few minutes right here, or 1 minute, where we're all gonna actually sit down and write. This is like what I call a little co-working space. And what I would like you guys to do is to write down, if you were going to create one boundary in your life, like what would that look like? What would it be? What would be the obstacle, and what will you do to overcome the obstacle? So those three things. What's the boundary that you're thinking would be good to create? What's going to get in your way? Remember, being proactive, and then that last bit about what are you going to do about the obstacle when it comes up. Okay. Does anyone want to share what they might have written down? You can just unmute yourself and you can like share it with us if you want. You don't have to, but if anyone wants to. I think we always learn when we hear from other people.
Yes, I wrote it in the group, in the group chat, but I can also say.
Cool.
Should I say or should I just?
Yeah, no, you can say it, Nicholas. Yeah.
Okay, so I live in a flat with many people, and I'm doing a home office right now. And this is often happens that someone knocks at my door during my working hours. It might happen 2 and even 3 times a day, especially in the times it happened when I have quite important meeting. So what I thought about doing, it's a problem because it's not separation of a personal and working times. I guess also maybe a little bit space because it's one house. So I thought to write actually on a piece of paper with big letters, please don't knock on the door during this time or something, or I'm not available, and just put it on the other side of the door. So the person who is there will just see and say, okay, I will come later.
Yeah, that's a really awesome idea. You can like make it switch so it turns around like I'm available, I'm not, and put it on your door. I tell a lot of my clients to do that. That's a really good one. Thank you for sharing that. We only have a few more minutes, so I am going to come back on and say thank you to everybody. And Regina's going to put in the chat like a little feedback survey. That's a Google survey. If you can give me your feedback, it really helps me know what other things that you guys might want to hear about for me, more free workshops, that sort of thing. Thank you for being here.